What's going on, Panda fam? This is your boy Tambourine Panda coming back at you with another gaming review. Today we're going to talk about Resident Evil 8 The Village, the 8th installment in the Resident Evil series, which is a survival horror game developed and published by Capcom, and the sequel to Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Resident Evil 8 The Village takes place roughly 3 years after the events of Resident Evil 7 and sees the player take control of Ethan Winters as we explore what happens to him and his family after the events of Resident Evil 7. So let's jump right on into the review. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you're enjoying the content, and let's jump right on in. So first we're going to go ahead and discuss the character and story in Resident Evil 8 The Village. And like I had just mentioned, this game takes place roughly 3 years after the events that happened in Resident Evil 7 Biohazard in Louisiana. Ethan and Mia have been relocated to Europe by Chris Redfield to start a new life with their newborn daughter Rosemary. And one night, as you're reading a story to your daughter and putting her down to bed, you are ambushed essentially by Chris Redfield and his team of agents. And before anything can be said or done or what have you, or any retaliation, they put some bullets into Mia and seemingly kill her. Abduct the baby, and put them in the back of a van for God knows what. However, the van is then attacked by something or someone, and the team is seemingly killed that is transporting you. Your daughter has been abducted, and your car or van or what have you has broken down right outside this very ominous looking village. And it is now your task to go into that village and figure out clues and talk to find people and things along the way that will help you find what happened to your daughter. And it definitely is an evolution of the character of Ethan from the 7th game. We certainly see the development of his story, development of Mia's character, the development of Rosemary's character as well. We also see the development of Chris's character as well. Chris Redfield being a staple character in the Resident Evil series. It's very awesome to see his character regardless in any of these sorts of games. So it was really cool to see him involved in this as well too. So from a character and story standpoint, it certainly gives you that very mysterious what's going on aspect to it. Certainly keeps the mystery involved, peeling back the layers as you go through this village and look for clues and solve puzzles in order to find your daughter. In the next portion of this review, we're going to go ahead and talk about the gameplay of this particular game. Now, I will be honest in admitting that I am not a massive fan of the Resident Evil series. I played 1, 2, I played Resident Evil 3 Remake. I didn't get into 4, 5, or 6. I didn't play this game's predecessor in Resident Evil 7. However, I have seen a lot of people play it. I have done a little bit of research in preparation for this particular review. So when I talk about this particular game, I'm almost speaking to it from a brand new player aspect, someone who doesn't really understand or know what Resident Evil mechanics should look like. So please take that into consideration as we move forward here with this review. The reason I'm reviewing this game is because I did enjoy it. I played it on my stream. I tend to try and review all the games that I play on stream, or most of them, especially when they're newer games as well too, or they're multi-platform. So that would be the reason for reviewing Resident Evil 8 The Village. But I do have a little bit of Resident Evil gameplay excuse me, under my belt, and I can at least speak to that. In that this game does seem like an old school Resident Evil game, in that you run around, you discover yourself puzzles, you get items that you can put together and use later to solve puzzles later on. There's certainly jump scare elements that are very, very good in this game, and it's not a Resident Evil game if there's not zombies or monsters or something of some sort jumping out to try and attack you and rip your face off at every turn. So I would say that the jump scares were great in this game. They weren't overdone. It didn't feel watered down towards the end of it. I still jumped out of my seat when something happened 15 hours into the game, much like I did when I first started the game, walking down that very dark snowy road after your van gets wrecked, discovering the village for the first time. It's very, very frightening. The ambiance that they create in the game is very good. The ambiance sounds throughout the game, the creaking wood, the birds, the rustling in the grass or the bushes, certainly adds to the aesthetic of the horror factor of the game. So from that particular perspective, I enjoyed the game. It felt very immersive. I felt very on edge most of the time when I was playing, waiting for that next particular jump scare to get me. And from a gameplay standpoint, I've heard many people in my particular stream chat say this is kind of the spiritual successor to Resident Evil 4 with its inventory and suitcasing options, and a lot of folks obviously saying that it is the spiritual successor or the sequel follow-up to Resident Evil 7 with the story, which obviously it is. So a lot of things harkening back to kind of the old school 1, 2, 3, and 4 Resident Evil games, the ones that I'm more familiar with in particular, as opposed to the more, I guess, high action, high octane feel to Resident Evil 5 and 6 that I've heard from a lot of people as well too. So it's cool to see that these games have kind of gotten back to their roots. And as such, I think they've done a very good job. Resident Evil 8 was pretty well received from players. Everybody that I've spoken to seems to enjoy the game, even if they're not a Resident Evil fan, much like myself. They seem to really enjoy the game regardless, and I am in that particular group or category of gamers that isn't really a big Resident Evil fan, but really enjoyed my experience with this game. That's not even to mention the replayability with another new game plus option where you get all your weapons and you have the option for challenge points to unlock more weapons and more things in the game and aesthetics and all of this other stuff that for me I would have never expected in a Resident Evil game personally. And maybe this has been something that's been a staple of these games for the last couple of entries. It's just like I mentioned earlier in the review, I'm not a big Resident Evil fan, so I don't know these things. So seeing a system of challenge points where you can unlock more guns to use on your playthroughs, obviously the increased difficulty setting with hardcore and then the Village of Shadows difficulty and unlocking more things through that, your achievements, speed runs, the replayability is obviously there with this game. And as far as the other things that you can do, I know mercenary mode has been a staple of this game for a little bit now, and that is prevalent again in this game as well too. So there's a lot of options with this game, whether it be replayability or whether it be mercenary mode, trying to complete challenges on a playthrough that you've already done and going back and trying to just redo things, or starting the new game on a similar difficulty to try and achieve those challenges that maybe you missed on your first playthrough. Really gives the game more of a replayability aspect. The game itself is no more than 10 to 15 hours in a single playthrough, but with these additions and with these add-ons, I could see people getting 100+ hours of playtime out of this game. Absolutely. For the next portion of this review, we're going to move into the combat system. And like I just mentioned, if you've played a Resident Evil game, you understand how this works. You understand there's a crafting system. If you're a fan of the more recent Resident Evil games, from my understanding, the cooking system and the modification system isn't something that's wholly new. Same thing with the mercenary mode that you play. That's separate from the main story game. So these things, again, they're not necessarily groundbreaking, but Resident Evil 8 takes what it does. Then here's the thing in general about the Resident Evil 8, and I'll kind of touch on this when we get to the rating and stuff, is it takes what it does, it takes what Resident Evil does well, in my opinion, and just improves upon that. So for example, Resident Evil is known for the, you know, crafting herbs and crafting bullets and your, you know, your first person kind of shooting game and zombie shooter game, and they do it very well. And Resident Evil 8, the Village, does it just as well. There's a plethora of different weapons, and you go to the Duke and you can get them upgraded, and if you find animals throughout the game, you can kill those animals and get their meat and take those to the Duke and have him craft meals for you to increase your health and all this other stuff. So they take what's great in those early Resident Evil games from a combat standpoint, and they just improve upon it. Now, as far as everything else is concerned, as far as the game is, there really isn't much else to speak of in regard to the combat. You can wall off doors, you can barricade stuff, much like I believe Resident Evil 7 and 6, if I'm not mistaken. You can obviously craft healing items, you can craft mines, you can craft bullets, you can craft, I mean, you can craft pretty much anything that you can think of except for like lockpicks. Well, the one thing that I don't believe that you can craft in the game. However, the Duke will have a lot of different plans for you. A lot of things will be unlockable through doing challenge points, which I mentioned earlier in the review, that you can get for doing things in the game. And then once you're done with the game, you go back out to the main menu and you can use these challenge points to unlock better guns, or infinite ammo, or things of that nature, so that you can go back in there, which is a really cool way to go back into the game and kind of just, you know, I guess Rambo your way through a Resident Evil 8 game and just feel OP as hell, which, hey, who doesn't like feeling like that? Am I right? So that's something cool that's in the game. And again, I can only speak to this game really in terms of that. I'm not sure if that's something they offered in other games, but it's something really cool in terms of the combat system. So I mean, there really isn't anything, again, too groundbreaking in regard to what they do in Resident Evil 8 The Village, but they don't have to be. They took what they've done in all of the other games, and they just improved upon it and made it better, slightly better in my opinion, and made it really fun and really interactive. And I know on the higher difficulties, the combat situations, you really gotta kind of judge what you're doing, because the ability to craft bullets and all of this other stuff is very few and far between. So it really makes the survivability in the higher difficulties even more palpable for this particular game. For the next portion of the review, we're going to discuss the graphics of Resident Evil 8 The Village. And this game, I was almost surprised to see just how much of customization options you have in regard to graphics, at least on the PC anyway. I can't really speak too much to the consoles, as I didn't play it on Xbox or PlayStation, but I saw a lot of customization options to really kind of optimize the game for your system on PC. And the other game that kind of comes to my head here off the top of my head, or comes to mind off the top of my head, is Red Dead Redemption 2, having that kind of customization and optimization in order to make sure that you're running buttery smooth and getting those nice God rays, and when you turn 4K and HDR settings on in this game, making sure that it's buttery smooth and crisp. And I do have to say, this game is quite pretty. I know a lot of the time is spent inside cavernous areas, but the game, they do a really good job of discerning each area of the game. And I won't get into too much specifics in regards to what I mean by that. You'll just have to go through the game and see what I'm talking about. When it comes to the areas, they certainly give each kind of their own personality. Like for example, the first area, Lady D's castle, which again, promotional material. That's what they use the first portion of the game for that. But it definitely has that very vampire kind of feel to it, that vampire fantasy kind of feel. Whereas there's a part later in the game that you go through, and it has a very werewolf kind of lichen vibe to it, and so on and so forth. So they did a very good job of, even within the village, separating out each area to kind of give it its own personality and its own ambiance and its own atmosphere, which I really liked about the game. And when you were outside in the village doing exploration, or after tackling a boss fight or something like that, it's pretty. It's very nice horizon shots, the very nice looking god ray shots. The graphical integrity was very good. I mean, again, this isn't something that's like awe-inspiring or anything like that, or next generation by any means, but it doesn't have to be. It was pretty, it was smooth. The lighting and the shadows worked really, really well, especially with HDR on in those really dark kind of areas. The HDR really played into effect. Or, you know, a dark area with like a torch on the wall, and that one little spot in that wall was like the only little area of light that you can get in that particular area. So it really added to the ambiance. If you can manage to put that sort of setting on HDR and 4K and all this other stuff, really adds to the ambiance of the game, and I think adds another level to kind of the immersion fact. This is one of those rare instances in this review where I will say that the graphics actually can lend some additional immersion to the game itself, which I think is pretty cool. When everything's all said and done, is it helps enhance the game, and it helps add to that immersion for sure. So what is there really to say about Capcom as a developer? I mean, we all know who Capcom is. For those of you who are familiar with the Mega Man series, you should know Capcom. For those of you who are familiar with the Street Fighter series, you should know Capcom. And for those of you who are familiar with the Resident Evil series, Capcom, again, should be very familiar to you. And I've got to say kudos to them on this particular installment. Like I just mentioned in my review, what I think they did is they knew what they had with Resident Evil 7. I think I had heard that they had sat down after 5 and 6 and really kind of took a long look in the mirror as far as what they wanted to do with the next couple of installments with Resident Evil series. And we got Resident Evil 7 and 8. And I must say I am impressed. So impressed that it makes me want to go back now and play Resident Evil 7 just so I can kind of fill out the story of Ethan Winters in Resident Evil 8 for myself now, which is a very rare thing for me as a gamer to want to now to play a game so late in the series, and it makes me want to go back and play the previous installment just to get that much more of the gameplay experience, the lore, the story, the combat, the characters, to see the different monsters and the graphics and how they did it with this, because Biohazard is wholly different from the village, from what I understand. We're talking, you get a very vampire and werewolf vibe from the village, as opposed to a very kind of chemically Biohazard mutant mutated kind of feel from the Biohazard game, obviously, is why it's named as such. So I've got to give Capcom kudos, and if I'm gonna go ahead and give this game a score or a rating, I would certainly give it a 9 out of 10. I think this game takes everything that the Resident Evil series does well and just continues to do that or improves upon it, which is great. Again, I've never encountered a game in a series that's made me want to go back and play earlier installments in the series because the game I just played was as good as it was. From a graphical standpoint, to a combat standpoint, to the story and the characters and them evolving it from Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Like I said, I have to give this game a 9 out of 10. Certainly recommend paying full MSRP for this game. In some cases, I'll either recommend you wait for a sale or just won't recommend it at all, much like Cyberpunk. But in this particular case, I certainly would pay the $60 for this game. The replayability is there. via its harder difficulties. There are different modes that you can play, mercenary mode, and there's just more of an incentive to go back and complete challenges so that you can go and unlock better guns and go Rambo through a bunch of zombies and werewolves and vampires and all this other stuff. So kudos to Capcom. I want to thank everybody for jumping into this review today. Please again make sure that you drop a like and a subscribe if I earned it today, and if you enjoyed the content, leave a comment below and let me know what you thought, and let me know what your thoughts are for the next installment in Resident Evil, because if you played the game and you waited until the end, then you know there's a little bit of an Easter egg there for you. Thanks again, Panda Fam, and have a great rest of your afternoon. Bye.